Welcome into the Skinny Podcast. It's the weekly Potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com, digital sports columnist and editor with Rick Broering. Each and every week, we look at sports topics of local interest, occasionally a national topic or two. We'll probably have a gambling segment this week to pick the AFC and NFC championship games, and a segment of the podcast where you can ask me a question on any topic. Just go to the Twitterverse, the Xverse, hit up the hashtag AskSkinnyAnything. It can be a question on any topic. It does not necessarily have to be about sports. And we will answer whatever you have to ask. We are neck deep in college basketball. The NFC and AFC championship games we mentioned are about to take place. Of course, the Bengals are in search of an offensive coordinator, and we'll see what direction that goes as Brian Callahan takes the job with the Tennessee Titans. The head coaching job, it became official literally just before this podcast started. So it had been reported a couple of days ago, but finally official as of this Wednesday morning. So we got a lot to get to, Rick.
We do. Weirdly, a lot of Bengals news to talk about here on the 24th of January, but that's the way the sports news cycle has gone this week. But we'll start with college basketball. Normally, I like to start with who's doing well, the good, but there wasn't a lot of good with the local teams over the last few days. So let's start with Kentucky, Skinny, because I think they're the most interesting storyline to me right now. They beat Georgia 105-96 on Saturday. And then they were embarrassed 79-62 at South Carolina on Tuesday. They had moved up to number 6 in the latest AP poll before the South Carolina loss. We've got Big Z's debut on Saturday, which was incredible. Let's start with Saturday first, because I think it was mostly good on Saturday. They give up 61 points in the second half, which I think was concerning, especially with the way this defense has struggled all year. But you win the game. You score over 100 points, and Big Z was so fun to watch that I don't think anyone really cared about the 61 points that they gave up in the second half.
Yeah, no, the whole story was him. You know, I was coaching a game that night, and our game hadn't started. The JV game was going on, and the buzz among a lot of the kids, the varsity kids in the stands, and the coaches were sitting there watching was, you know, we're looking at our phones and seeing him drop the 3 threes in the first half, and I can only imagine what the buzz was like in Rupp Arena that night, and it looked like, oh my gosh, this elite offensive team has now just added a 7'2" 3-point shooter to add to the mix. And oh my God, how are they going to be stopped? And then we'll find out. We found that out on Tuesday night at South Carolina. But yeah, Saturday night, I think for a lot of people, the end result was great because you want to win if you're a Kentucky fan. But it was more about what he did and how impressive he was and the fact that he finally became eligible.
Yeah, Skinny. So you watch this 7'2" player who's moving fluidly. He's catching the ball in transition and throwing a behind the back assist into the corner for a 3. He's knocking down threes himself. Was this a little bit of a mirage, a little bit of beginner's luck, or is this a guy who is going to completely change this UK team here?
I don't think he will, but I think it does add another weapon, although, you know, he didn't do much on Tuesday night, so maybe it was just beginner's luck and the adrenaline flowing and the chance to finally play. But, you know, he came with a lot of hype, and he certainly backed that up in the first few minutes of him playing on Saturday. And then you wonder, okay, you know, was Tuesday kind of a comeback to earth? Was it just him getting caught up in the team? He didn't get a whole ton of minutes, didn't get very many shots up either. And also trying to get him ingrained. It's fun to get him ingrained when you're up 53-34 at the half, as they were on Saturday. It's a little bit harder when you're struggling to score like they were at South Carolina.
Well, that's the thing that I keep looking at is just trying to implement a player into your lineup, a new player who hasn't played with you at all yet this year. I realize he's been practicing, but it's different to get practice reps. And a lot of times I'm sure he's running scout team because he's not actually available. And to be actually in the mix, and you're trying to find him a spot to check into the rotation, and you're down on the road against an SEC opponent, that's going to be really difficult to do, much less make him feel comfortable while you're doing that and get him into the flow. He did come in with a lot of hype, but I also felt like they were really trying to downplay that hype as we were getting closer to the chance that he might actually see the floor. You heard Calipari talking a lot about he'll play, but I'm not sure how much we'll play him. It might only be 5 minutes. Obviously, he played more than that in his debut, but yeah, I mean, I was really impressed by the debut, but I would say I'm still a little bit skeptical of how this whole thing is going to work out with the 3 7-footers and trying to get him into the mix as much as you can.
Well, as much as he likes to use an 8-man rotation, I mean, that's a 9th guy that's taking minutes away from other people. Fierro's going to have to be put in the mix at some point, as a defensive specialist, but he's going to be in the rotation at some point. Is he really going to go 10 deep the deeper he goes into the season and into March? And if so, what does that do for other guys' minutes that have been pretty effective in the role they're currently in?
Yeah, well, and Adut Thiero is an interesting case. I wanted to bring him up because on Tuesday, I thought Cal made kind of an interesting comment. He said Adut Thiero is still out. He's not going to play at South Carolina, but, quote, watching him, I'm not sure why he isn't playing. Was that just like Cal trying to tell us that he actually does look pretty healthy and he should be back soon? Or is he like saying that Adut Thiero is sitting out when he shouldn't be? I thought that was a strange comment.
I take it as that because the injury has been general soreness. And
Yeah.
I can buy that for a game, right? I mean, you get banged and bumped around. You know, maybe you're just too sore to get moving for a game. But this has lingered for what now? 3 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, we're going on like a month of general soreness keeping Adut Thiero out of the lineup. I mean, I hate to be, skeptical here, but like you have to start wondering if something else is going on.
Right.
And then this comment from John Calipari just adds to that, in my opinion. But in terms of this game against South Carolina, Kentucky was a team that came in averaging over 90 points per game, Skinny. They're the most impressive offense in the country. They scored just 62. How much should we be worried about that?
I think it's an outlier. The offense, the defense is still not an outlier, but the offense, that was just an outlier to me. You had a bunch of guys who make shots, miss shots on the road. That unfortunately happens in conference play. They didn't rebound it great, which then, of course, they can't get out in transition when they don't rebound it. So, yeah, to me, I'm going to take this just as an outlier on the road. It is a little concerning that they played 3 road games and they had a nail-biter at Florida, lost the overtime at A&M, now have lost this one. And you have to wonder, and it's the old adage, defense travels, sometimes offense doesn't. And maybe that's an issue for this team is going to be in every SEC road game, that if they don't score into the 80s, they're going to have a hard time winning games in the league.
Well, yeah, the first question is just trying to score on the road a real problem for this team? Are they going to have issues every time they're not playing in front of the home crowd at Rupp Arena scoring? And then the second is regardless of whether that's going to be an issue in games for you, can you find another way to win when the shots aren't going down? And we were thinking maybe we had seen a little bit of that last week, but clearly they haven't figured that out entirely yet. So that's kind of where my mind's at with this UK team as we get deeper into SEC play. Did you have any other thoughts on Kentucky?
Yeah, the only other thing is for whatever reason, South Carolina has John Calipari's number in Columbia. That's been kind of a house of horrors. But it is, I think the part that gives you a little bit of pause, again, is 3 road games in the league, and you could easily be 0-3. You could also throw it back in my face that they could have won at A&M and could easily be 2-1. I understand that, but they just have not found a way to be consistent on offense on the road, and we just know that defensively they're not going to be there. It's funny, South Carolina's done a pretty good job of holding teams in check scoring-wise, but I did look at their KenPom defense. It's only like 50th in the country. It's not awful, but it wasn't as elite as I kind of thought it was, because I know that was kind of a thing going into the game of, hey, South Carolina's really good defensively, and maybe they are. Maybe they exceed their KenPom number. I don't know.
No, it's because broadcasters look at total points scored, and then they make their decision about whether you're good defensively or not. South Carolina isn't great defensively. They just played a really slow pace on offense.
Correct.
So they keep the score down for both teams. So they're good defensively, but they're not elite by any stretch of the imagination. And that's the issue we have with the old counting statistics merging with the new KenPom world. Yes. And sometimes broadcasters don't get that. Skinny Cincinnati, they lost to number 11 Oklahoma at home, 69-65 on Saturday. Then they lost at number 7 Kansas on Monday, 74-69. 2 more hard-fought losses for this Bearcats team where felt that they played pretty well, just didn't have enough to come out with a win. We talked a lot about this opening 6-game stretch of Big 12 play for UC, where all 6 of those games were against ranked opponents at the time. 2 of those opponents are no longer ranked. But now that we're past that, and they finished 2-4 during that stretch, all 4 losses were close games. Really, all the games were close except for their blowout win at BYU, which was a bit of a surprise. Are you encouraged, discouraged, or unmoved by UC's 2-4 start to Big 12 play?
I'd say encouraged because it's funny. If you look at just go inside some of the numbers of these games, in theory, they should be getting blown out on these road games. I mean, they really should be. And instead, they find enough grit to hang around and play tough and stay close and fight back from deficits and all of those things. I think that's the encouraging part. But I hope it's not fool's gold that listen, they do all these things to play hard and stay close, but they can't find ways to win. And I said this on a podcast I was on yesterday. The cumulative toll that can take on you, right? That you keep grinding, and yet the grind doesn't produce the end result, which is supposed to be a W. and you need it to be a W. And it's not. At what point is it just the grind get to you? Because you're going to keep looking up every week and going, well, hell, this is a hell of a week. Look at this week. Oh my God, look at this week. And I just think the grind of that, and I bring that to a lot of times in really good college football leagues, right? Where it's not that you can't beat a really good team early in your conference. It's the grind of it. It's facing Florida and then Alabama and then LSU and then a road game at Georgia. I mean, it's just the cumulative effect of all of that takes. And that would be the thing that scares me a little bit about. You see, the flip side is, again, look inside the numbers. There's some ugly numbers in there, and yet they're in these games, and it feels like it's fixable things.
That I think you nailed that. That is exactly how I felt after these two games for Cincinnati. I mean, going back to the Kansas game, I didn't really think they played well at all in that game.
And I didn't either. And yet you look up and they're right in it.
Yeah, you're coming out of the final media timeout with a real chance to win it. Not like we're trying to make a comeback and make a run at them and make this thing respectable. No, they had a real shot to win that game, and it felt like they might win that game coming out of the final media timeout. And again, I did not think that they played well throughout that game. They had turnovers that were, I don't know if uncharacteristic at this point because they seem to be happening a little bit too often, but turnovers that probably shouldn't happen or are unforced. Now they did make some free throws in that game. Finally, they've had the free throw issue that the fans have been losing their minds about. But
they practiced extra on Sunday, I was told.
While they were tired. Yeah. Worked out effectively for them. But I think the biggest thing for me is seeing them in Big 12 play. And this is where it was hard to figure out in non-conference play when they weren't playing good teams. This group is long and athletic, and they are tough, and they look like a Wes Miller team. This is what he did at UNC Greensboro. He had longer, better athletes than you did. He would press you a little bit, get up in you defensively. And I said earlier this year that I really thought this UC team had a chance to be a great defensive group, and that's where they were going to hang their hat. That wasn't the case through the non-conference schedule. But as we've gotten into Big 12 play, they actually are one of the better defensive teams in conference play so far. And I think you're starting to see them look like the type of team West wants to be. My concern for them is the same concern you've brought up since day one of this season. They need more offensive firepower. And they're actually getting multiple guys scoring on any given night.
That's the problem because it's a different guy each time. And as a coach, I think that's hard to rely on. Like, hey, I want to play this guy, and okay, he's missed a couple of shots. Is it a night where he's going to bounce back from that, or is it a night where I just got to go elsewhere for that? And I think that's been the big issue is who can carry the load for an 8-minute stretch of a game. And I'm not talking scoring 18 points in that 8-minute stretch, but come down and carry you for 8 minutes and get you 10, 12, and maybe create another 2 or 3 buckets. And I just don't know who that guy is, if they even have that guy.
I think that's the issue. They just lack that true alpha on the offensive end. Like, honestly, a David DeJulius or a Landers Nolly on this team would probably really help them. A guy who is just willing to say, I'm willing to be that guy all the time, regardless of whether the shots are going in or not. The issue they have right now is I think Dan Skillings is the closest to being that guy. And he is just not there yet in terms of his development. He's still so raw with his decision-making and his feel for the game and his IQ that he just isn't always reliable. And the other guy that's probably closest to being that guy is Simas Lukosius, and he's just so inconsistent with his shot, and most of his game is spot-up shooting that it just doesn't really seem like they have that reliable go-to offensive player. And if they did, I mean, they might be a real handful this year.
And that's where I go back to, I know everybody was over the moon about getting the 2 bigs transfers, but I wasn't. I thought they'd help. But the problem is Bandego gives you nothing on offense and Reynolds gives you next to nothing on defense. If you could combine the two, if you could go back to the old Iowa high school girls days where you played 3-on-3, like there were 3 offensive players on one end of the court and there was 3 defensive players on the other end. If you could do that, put Bandego in one spot and Reynolds on the other, maybe they can petition the NCAA for that. You'd have yourself something there, but unfortunately you don't. And I think that becomes tough too, is you want defense, but at some point you also want to go, well, I want to throw it in the post and get a bucket. I want to get something easy, and they just can't.
Should we get an old man's 6-on-6 league going where you play 3 play defense, 3 play offense?
Absolutely.
That'd be fantastic. And you just rotate a little bit maybe, but imagine the outlet passes in that league. I would be like Wes Unseld in an over 40 league like that. That would be great. We should look into that. No, but I think you're dead on with your takes on Cincinnati right now. And the big guys, Skinny, watching them, I mean, I'm not trying to take shots at these college players, but let's face it, they're both making a whole heck of a lot more money than we are this year to play for UC. So I feel a little bit better saying this. That's a bad investment. I'm going to spend over $500,000 for those two guys through NIL money. Like, those two guys are not producing the way they were paid to produce this year at UC. And I mean, if they were, this team might be downright scary if Aziz Bandaogo was as good as everyone thought he was going to be.
Here would be my question then, I guess. Would you consider, if you're Wes Miller, and I don't think this is possible because this goes back to the Victor Locken of last year playing the 5 spot, getting in consistent foul trouble, but are you better off with a lineup that has both point guards and Skillings, Lukosius, Locken, or Newman, Lukosius, Skillings, one of the point guards, Locken? Are you better with that group? And then Bandaogo, just when, for sub's sake and maybe you're looking to get a couple key defensive stops, he plays then?
I think we've seen the 2 point guards playing together a little bit more. So I do think that's going to continue. The problem with it is if you lean all into the offensive side and you try to go with your best offensive lineup that you just laid out, now I don't think you're good on either end of the floor. Like, they're pretty good defensively when they have their most
I'm not
athletic.
So sure I wouldn't want to see it. I'm sorry, right? I mean, I'm not so sure I wouldn't want to see if that group couldn't play some defense, though.
I just think we've seen enough of Victor Locken defending Big 12 caliber 5s to know that that's probably not going to work out consistently well. And in general, I think you just lose some of your overall length and athleticism with that lineup. And that's where I think they are hanging in these Big 12 games. Is they look the part of a Big 12 team. They are big, tough, athletic, and
way more so than I thought. I mean, I really thought, listen, you got to have an NBA player or two to really win high at the Big 12 level. And I don't feel like there's an NBA guy on this team at the moment. Now, Jizzle could be one day, but not at the moment. And then, you're taking your 2 best scorers off into Julius and Nolly. And that's where I kind of stood for this year of you're taking those 2 guys who were legit college scorers off this team. And you've upgraded the talent some, but not to the level I thought that would compete in the Big 12. And yet they've competed. But competing, I think we're over. I think you get to a point where, okay, it's cute, it's fun, it's been cool. The atmosphere in Fifth Third for UC fans has been off the charts great, and the competition level is much more fun to watch, much more enjoyable. I mean, you're on. There's no really primetime game anymore in college basketball, right? But still, that 9:00 Monday slot still holds some weight in gold to me. It's still a big time game that's on, and that's where you are now. But again, you look up this week and it's almost a must-win home game against UCF if you still feel like this team can make the NCAA tournament. I don't think it can. I don't think it's going to get enough wins to do that. But now suddenly you're in Game 7 at must-win territory because then it's 2 more road games after that. And then, oh, by the way, then you fall out of that and get Houston coming to your place.
That's where I think you're talking about the coming up short, getting close, but losing the game still can get old. I think that's where it starts to set in, is if you're not able to win the UCF game on Saturday and you continue this stretch of coming up short. I think it starts to really set in after this next few games, because the first 6 we knew were going to be so difficult. But now there is a little bit of a reprieve in the schedule. Not to say it's easy. These are still good teams, but they're not, all top 20, top 25 teams that you're going to be facing. So they got to find a win. They'll they'll host UCF on Saturday at 7 p.m. I didn't mention with UK, they'll play at Arkansas on Saturday at 6.
So back to Kentucky for a second. We're going to find out about this road thing, because I think once you get to that 4-game sample size, we're going to know if this is going to be an ongoing problem for them scoring on the road and winning on the road in the league.
Yeah, so that was Kentucky and Cincinnati. We'll move on to Xavier, which, by the way, you're talking about UC playing in the Big 12 and how this is cool. How much fun is local college hoops right now? I mean, we watch UC at Kansas on Monday night, and then the next night we're watching Xavier at Creighton, who is ranked and playing pretty well and a fun game. I mean, college basketball in this area is just great right now to watch. And it's what I've kind of always pictured, is like both of those teams being in a high major conference at the same time. And it's funny. It's like UC was in the Big East, Xavier was in the A-10, then Xavier gets in the Big East and UC goes to like a worse version of the A-10 and the American. And it was just strange. Now they're both in a high major conference, and it has been great. Xavier beat Georgetown 92-91 on Friday at Cintas. Then they lost 85-78 at number 17 Creighton on Tuesday night. Skinny Desmond Claude, he was great for 3.5 games for Xavier over the last 3.5. And then the second half of this one against Creighton, he went 0 for 8 from the field. I mean, he just could not make a shot. And it felt very similar to those games a few weeks ago when we were talking about him. And you're asking me, like, does Claude need to be better for Xavier to win? And it's like, he probably does, but he might be giving you all he can give you. Well, he took his offensive game to another level. He started making shots for 3.5 games, really, because he was great in the first half at Creighton. Had 18 points by halftime, but then only mustered 2 in the second half and was 0 for 8. Where are you at on Desmond Claude and the Xavier offense right now?
Well, I wonder this. So I was at the Georgetown game with a friend of mine. In the second half, it felt like he got blown by. Anytime Georgetown wanted to blow by him, they blew by him. And I wonder in that game and then watching this game and what he did on the offensive end, if he just doesn't run out of gas. Because, again, he's asked to do so damn much that second half, it just takes its toll. I don't think people – that's one thing I don't think people really quite can grasp is the fatigue factor for these guys. You just feel like they're robots and they're the same player in minute 1 as they are in minute 35 of a game. And they're just not. I mean, and some guys do coast on one end of the floor and then maybe they are fresher. I don't think that's Desmond Claude's DNA. I mean, Rick, I don't know if you agree with me or not, but that Georgetown game, I swear to God, it felt like anytime they wanted to blow by him in the second half, they just blew right by him right to the rim and went right to the rim. Some of it was off ball screens and they didn't do a very good job in that, but some of it was just him getting blown by. And after watching that and knowing that he can be an elite defender and then watching last night, I just wonder if he just isn't asked to do so much that when the game is on the line, he just spent.
Yeah, really, Skinny. I think that's a good point because very much so in the second half of the Creighton game, it felt like he just ran out of gas. The physicality of Shireman was all of a sudden affecting him. It didn't at all in the first half. In the second half, it felt like, his legs looked like they weighed 100 pounds each. And every time he got bumped, it like really knocked him off his spot and he just couldn't finish through any of it, all of that stuff. And that's not who he typically is. But to your point, I think one thing that gets overlooked a lot of times is most times, if you have a great offensive player in college, he is not going to be guarding the other team's best player too.
Right.
Because you need him offensively. And
you don't need him in foul trouble.
Right. And you don't want him in foul trouble, of course. So with Xavier this year, that isn't really the case. Oftentimes, Desmond Claude has to guard the opposing team's best player, and that might be a point guard. That might be a forward this year, just the way his versatility is and the way Xavier struggles defensively. He usually has to take on that matchup. So you might say, well, everybody's playing defense. How much harder is it? Well, there's a difference between guarding the 4th or 5th option on a team who's
absolutely
mostly out there standing in a corner or setting up and being a decoy versus guarding the other team's best player who's running off of several screens every possession and getting all types of set plays for him, taking dribble handoffs. And you've got to constantly be chasing him, getting banged into by these screeners, all that type of stuff.
The screeners aren't very small either.
No, they're not in the Big East, especially. And it does take its toll on you, Skinny. So I think that's a legitimate case or a legitimate theory for why Desmond Claude has had some issues both on defense and offense in the second half of some of these games. But I don't know that helps Xavier much at this point because they need him to be really good, unfortunately.
They do, but I do wonder if Sean takes a look and the way Swain is starting to play a little bit, I think you can't count on him to be but he's becoming a pretty good slasher, man. And I think he's becoming a legit option, if you will. And then maybe a little more Trey Green just to take a few more minutes off of Dez. And maybe it's in the first half and you go, hey, I've got to sit in for this 3-minute stretch. And then maybe it's a TV timeout and then maybe for another minute after the TV. And I get a good 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Maybe it's not that long. You know what I'm saying? Whatever that time frame is you want to use. And yeah, maybe we lose by 2 points in that little war. But in the overall scheme, I'm going to have a fresher guy in the second half. I'm just looking for options because it feels like it's kind of Groundhog Day with this thing.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because that's essentially exactly what he did in this Creighton game. There was a 4-minute stretch in the first half where both Quincy Oliveri and Desmond Claude were off the floor at the same time. Trey Green and Dalen Swain checked in for them, and they played nearly 4+ minutes, and they actually outscored Creighton by 2 during that 4-minute stretch.
So it's funny. I swear to God, I did not see that because I was coaching the game last night. I saw the whole second half. I watched the whole second half, so I did not even know he did that.
Yeah, so he did basically exactly what you're talking about. I think it's for the reason you're bringing up is trying to buy Desmond an extra minute or two when you're playing well. If you have a lead like you did in the first half of this one and you got your offense going, get him off the floor and try to give him a little bit of energy back. I don't know if they can do that more consistently, but I do think the freshmen starting to emerge, Dalen Swain being able to, you mentioned his offense, but his defense too. The fact that he's that versatile defensive piece who can maybe guard the opposing team's best player and take some of that load off Desmond Claude for half the game or something. And Trey Green giving them a little bit more offense as well. I do think that is significant for the Xavier team because and I should say Davion McKnight and Abu Usman are playing better too. They're getting better production out of those older transfer guys. But I think Xavier's upside this year came from the freshmen getting better.
Yes.
And we're
Yes.
starting to see that finally.
Yeah, I tell you, Swain coming off dribble handoffs, getting down. Man, he comes downhill and he's got one thing in mind. He's going to the rim with that thing.
Yeah, he's got a chance to be pretty special. He was a little bit farther behind in terms of his confidence and his understanding of how good he can be. You know, a lot of guys with his skill set, they come in and they're trying to do too much. He was like a guy where you need to do more. You're capable of it.
Yeah, and how about maybe from a confidence boost, the dunk that wins the game against Georgetown and the light bulb goes on.
I think it was huge. I mean, you saw in the first half of this Creighton game, he hit a 3 in front of their bench. He was talking to their bench. It's like, that's not the same kid I saw a week ago before he had that big finish there against Georgetown.
And he's got the physicality and athleticism to do it by far.
Yeah, and just think about him as he starts to add real strength and weight to his frame, because he's still pretty thin, even though he has that length and wiry athleticism. X will play at UConn on Sunday.
Oh, nice
at
reprieve.
Yeah, nice reprieve.
Nice reprieve. And let's go back to this too. And again, I know there was some thought maybe if you could steal a Creighton game and can win some of the games you're supposed to win, that you could sneak back into the NCAA conversation. I still think that's very difficult. I mean, even good Xavier teams have gone to Creighton and lost, and that's the other part to it too. That's the hard part of it in these conferences. You can play pretty well and still come up short.
Never said.
Sorry about that. I agree with you there, Skinny. Let's move on to NKU. They beat Milwaukee by 18 and Green Bay by 22 over the weekend. Green Bay was tied for first, by the way, when NKU beat them. NKU is now tied for third and 1 game back of Oakland, who is currently in first place. Skinny, before we even get into talking about those games, I did want to bring up on Saturday, NKU honored 2 true living legends. And Absolutely. I know that term gets thrown out there way too often, but these people, if you live in this area, truly are legends. Ken Shields and Nancy Winstall, the former men's and women's coaches at NKU. Ken, of course, took NKU to back-to-back Division II national championship games. They lost both of them. Nancy actually won a couple of national championships at the Division II level when she was the coach at NKU. I guess my only thought here to add to all of this, one, it was cool to see them get honored, but two, it's really difficult, I think, to be great somewhere, do something at a really high level, and then see other people come in and do the same thing and remain completely supportive and upbeat and talk nothing but positively about the people who come after you. And yet Ken Shields and Nancy Winstall have been so supportive of everyone that has continued to take this program to the Division I level and do great things since they left. That, I mean, they're just still so relevant up at NKU, despite them being long gone and past their careers when they were head coaches. It's really cool to see.
Yeah, for those that maybe don't know, some quick background, Ken Shields took NKU's men's team in Division II to back-to-back championship games. They did come up short, but runner-up finishes in 96, 97. And Nancy Winstall took NKU's women's team to 2 national championships in Division II. See if I get the years right, 2000 and 2008, if I'm not mistaken, were the 2 years that they won. So they are clearly legends because of their accomplishments, and you're right, because of the people they are. I always feel honored. I consider both of them friends, and Ken Shields is enough of a friend that he was the one that nominated me for the Northern Kentucky Athletic Directors Hall of Fame. So I felt I didn't know who nominated, and it turned out to be him. And I was so honored that he did that. And it was not for me as a player or a coach or anything. It was for me as a contributor for the years I worked at the Kentucky Post, covering high schools and colleges in Northern Kentucky. But I was always so honored for that. And every time I see him, we have a good conversation. Unfortunately, I had to coach on Saturday night, or I would have been there. In fact, I was getting ready to buy a ticket. I went, "Oh, we got a game Saturday night. Oh, I can't go." But it was. I'm glad NKU did that, because it's certainly both clearly well deserved.
Yeah, they have banners now hanging in Truist Arena with their names and accomplishments on them. I thought it was well done by NKU to honor them, and they did a good job of it. And I just, you mentioned it too, but like, that's what shocks me so much is I would consider Ken Shields a friend. Like 2 summers ago, we went to a
I think there are thousands and thousands of Northern Kentuckians that would consider him a friend. You can go. It's not even 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. It's maybe 2 degrees is all you have to go away before you run into somebody and somebody comes up with hey, you heard from Coach Shields lately? How's he doing? And he's that kind of guy.
It is. But see, I say that not to be like, oh yeah, I'm a part of this, is about me too, but to say like Ken Shields is a guy who is older, his health is in decline. And yet if I see him, like as he's walking out of Mac's Pizza Pub after the game, it's like, Rick, how are you doing? And he brings up Holy Cross, the high school I went to, or some Pat Ryan, who was an assistant for him, that was my dean of discipline when I was in high school in my baseball. Like he's so sharp still and remembers everyone and what they're doing and who their family members are and all of these connections. I just don't know how he does all that because, like you said, I'm a peon in his giant universe, and yet he knows everything that's going on with me still, which always is just so impressive to me.
He took a big jump. Keep in mind, he started his coaching career at Little St. Thomas High School, which is no longer in Northern Kentucky. Then to Highlands, where he had great success and went to the state tournament numerous times. And then a giant leap of faith by NKU to hire a high school coach to come be the head coach of their college program at the time. Granted, in Division II, but it's still a relevant level of basketball, for goodness sakes. And what he did was crazy. I got a quick Ken Shields story because it's one of my favorites. Dave Beazold used to. And when I was doing some NKU radio, if we were going on a road trip or the few times we flew on trips, Bees would set a weird time, like we're leaving at 7:07 or we're leaving at 6:36. And one day I asked him, I said, why the weird time? Why not just do a round number? He goes, that was a Coach Shields thing. He always said an odd time. I don't know why he did it, but he always did it. And I'm like, that's kind of cool in a weird way.
Yeah, especially when people remember you for things like that, and then they adopt it into their program. It becomes kind of the thing you're known for. Just a special guy. And so is Nancy. I don't know her as well personally, so I don't have the insight there, but incredible basketball coach. She won a national title while I was in school there at NKU in 2008. So that was certainly a cool moment. And one of my high school classmates was on that team, Rachel Lantry. So all of that was pretty cool to see. But all right, let's talk about this this NKU team, Skinny, because Sam Vincent goes down. They're trying to find themselves for a few games there, and they lose a couple of close ones. They lose Cleveland State in a tight one on the road. They lost the Oakland one in a tight one on the road, and they barely beat Detroit at Detroit. And it's like, oh, okay, this team's scuffling along. It seems like they're getting better, but these results are kind of shaky right now. All of a sudden, NKU is clearly playing their best basketball of the year, an 18-point win over Milwaukee, who people expected to be good, and they just got one of their best players back, a 22-point win over first-place Green Bay, who has been playing fantastic and has a real player of the year candidate, Noah Reynolds, who was committed to Wisconsin before the assistant at Wyoming, which is where he was transferring from, got the head coaching job at Green Bay, and his brother was hired an assistant at Green Bay, so he decided to go to Green Bay instead of starting at Wisconsin this year. But I mean, that tells you the type of talent he is. He's a real player. Skinny, I think if I'm talking about NKU and what I've seen from them that impresses me during this stretch, and they've been playing better basketball, Keena Tijere is the first thing that jumps out to me. I mean, he is worth the price of admission, and he might be the most exciting player to watch in the area right now.
That dunk the other night that I saw the highlight of, where it looks like he's looking down into the rim, is absurd.
He gets off the floor. Not that he gets off so high. He does jump high, but he's 6'9". So if you jump high at all and you're 6'9", you're going to look like you're high. The thing that is crazy is how quickly he gets off the floor for these like putback dunks and these block shots. He's a special athlete. I don't know there's many people like him in the entire country.
Yeah, and especially if you're playing in that league where where the bigs are not elite. I mean, you can certainly be a difference maker. And we talked about this, Rick. I mean, in this league right now, you can go from the outhouse to the penthouse and the penthouse to the outhouse in literally 1 week. It feels like just a podcast or two ago, and it probably was a couple of podcasts ago, we were talking about IPFW maybe being the best team in the league, and they're sitting in first place, and now they're 4-5, I believe.
Yeah, they lost like 5 straight games, and that's actually NKU's next game. They'll host Purdue Fort Wayne at 7 on Thursday.
I'm coming.
Hell yeah. I think Mo might be there too.
My buddy Tom Gamble and I are coming, and he's got some of his cronies coming, so we're coming tomorrow night.
All right. Well, that is going to be a scene. I honestly wish I could maybe sneak up to that suite that you guys are going to be in for a few minutes, but I imagine I won't be in condition to broadcast if I come out of there. So
yeah, that's probably a good point.
Yeah. Skinny, the other thing, I mean, obviously Marquez Warwick, we're talking a lot about his scoring record and how he's chasing Drew McDonald. He's now about 90-ish points away. So next maybe 5 or so games, he has a chance to get that. But aside from Warwick, I think LJ Wells and Trey Robinson at the forward position, and it was kind of like those two were a tandem. It was like one game, one of them would play well. The next game, the other might play well, but you didn't get them going at the same time. All of a sudden now, both of those guys are becoming pretty reliable, and they're playing a lot together.
Yeah, and it gives you, again, 2 legitimate, forward position type guys in a league where there's some of those, but, you needed somebody to step up, and you're hoping, okay, maybe it'll be a guard to step up in place of the guard who goes down, Sam Vincent. Instead, it's a bigger guy who does it, and that allows you then to not have to maybe go deeper into the well, if you will, at the guard position to say, hey, I got to have a guard replace a guard. No, it's LJ Wells, who's technically a forward wing, who's stepping up and playing really well. And it feels like they kind of have weathered this a little bit.
It does. And, I felt like when Sam went down, I felt like this NKU team would still be competitive, but I definitely thought the rest of the season was going to be a war. I did not think that they would be winning games by double digits. To see them beat two quality teams. I mean, this wasn't Detroit.
No, right.
It wasn't Detroit and Robert Morris that they beat.
Although, and it's funny, and they struggled with Detroit, right?
Right. And that, so, I mean, it's, you never know in conference play, especially when you're on the road, but to beat Milwaukee by 18 and Green Bay by 22, I think the rest of the league probably looked at those scores the same way I did and said, NKU's got a real chance again this year to win this whole thing with or without Sam Vincent.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, they're a game out of first place to get that 1 seed, and there's a lot of basketball still to be played inside the league.
Yep. All right, so they will host Purdue Fort Wayne on Thursday at 7. As we mentioned, they'll play Youngstown State on Sunday. That game is at Youngstown State at 1:30. So that's going to be a big one as Youngstown State is towards the top of the conference as well.
They got a big one. They got a 7-3 guy from Simon Kenton, Gabe Dines.
Gabe Dines blocking a lot of shots. Yeah,
yes,
blocking a lot of shots. I've got one other story. It's from a regional team. We don't typically talk about Indiana, but the Hoosiers have been struggling a little bit recently, and they just lost a game to Wisconsin, and there was a moment during their broadcast where their legendary play-by-play man, Don Fisher.
I love Don Fisher.
Yeah, made the following comment during the game, and I just want to get your thoughts on it.
For my 51 years behind the microphone.
Hold on, let's start that again.
And I have never said this before in my 51 years behind the microphone at Indiana University, but I am embarrassed for this ball club.
Right now.
Not because of the score.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So that's Don Fisher saying he's never said this in his 51 years broadcasting, but he is embarrassed for Indiana's basketball program. This occurred after CJ Gunn for Indiana was ejected for elbowing a Wisconsin player in the face. It was kind of one of those retaliation moments where the other player was annoying him. And so he gave him a pretty weak forearm chuck to the elbow, but it's right in front of official, right in front of the Wisconsin bench. And in this day and age, with replay being what it is, you 100% know that's going to be seen and you're going to be tossed from the game for it. So I think that's what Don Fisher was talking about. I listened to him on some radio appearances yesterday to hear his follow-up on those comments. And that's basically what he said, is just like, he felt it was a silly mistake and that players have been getting intentional fouls, technical fouls thrown out of games for Indiana this year at a rate that he said he's never seen before. And I think that's really where his comments came from. Did you have an issue with him saying he's embarrassed for Indiana? Do you think that's something a broadcaster should lay off?
Well, when you've done that for 51 years, I think you've got some cachet and you are the voice of the fans in that regard. And maybe I don't think he's out of bounds with that if that's the way he feels. I mean, Indiana could certainly do something if it thought it was out of bounds. I didn't think it was above board. So, no, I got no problem with it, especially if that's what he was referring to is kind of the culmination of what you talked about. If it's a number of ejections and finally this is the latest in him on just a stupid, flagrant, idiotic play, I can see that after 51 years doing it. He's one of my favorites. I mean, back before, we had ESPN and all that, and you'd have to I'd watch Dayton games on Channel 7 with rabbit ears in my bedroom, and you could barely get the fuzzy Dayton games because they used to televise those a lot. And then if you had to find a game on the radio, you could pick up Indiana games. So I've listened to Don Fisher for a long, long time, and I think he's one of my favorites.
Yeah, if you're a younger listener and you're not aware of who Don Fisher is, it's kind of like, I mean, if you know IU basketball or college basketball in that area, he's the Marty Brennaman of that area.
Yes,
I mean, they know him like a celebrity and treat him like such. And so him saying this, he's going to get away with it. He's already kind of walked the statement back, clarified what he meant, and I don't think there's any serious issues that are going to come out of this. But when Don Fisher says something like that, you take notice. I certainly did. It caught me. I immediately started texting that to some of my broadcast friends saying, can you believe he said this? And so I just wanted to get your take because I thought that was a kind of an interesting moment. I don't know where Mike Woodson's tenure is headed at Indiana, but I have a feeling this may be a moment we look back on and say, that was probably a good sign that things were headed the wrong way.
Yeah, and they're not playing great basketball either.
No, they're not. All right. Any other college basketball thoughts, Skinny, before we move on to the Bengals here?
No, just another wild and crazy week in college basketball. Although, again, it feels like UConn's starting to separate itself a little bit. And unfortunately, that's where Xavier's got to go next.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy. But like I said, I mean, it's just been such a fun year to watch good basketball if you're into watching the local teams. So So we'll take it. More ranked teams, more ranked games. It doesn't get any better than that. All right, let's move on to the Bengals, Skinny. The Tennessee Titans have officially hired Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan as their new head coach just before we started this podcast you mentioned. The Titans surprised the league a few weeks ago when they fired Mike Vrabel after 6 seasons. Now they're moving on to Callahan. So let's start there, Skinny. How would you feel if you're a Titans fan about going from Mike Vrabel to Brian Callahan?
Like Mike Vrabel a lot. The Athletic did a heck of a piece on a kind of behind the scenes of how things unfolded for Vrabel and the way that tenure ended. And it was a lot of behind the scenes stuff. And he and the owner seemed like they clashed heads. I know if you're a fan, you're looking and going, yeah, but that offense wasn't all that good this year. And yeah, they didn't even make the playoffs. But I think I said this last week. I didn't think Brian was going to get a head coaching job this time around. But I'm glad he did. I'm happy for him personally. But I said this last week on the podcast, Rick, if you thought he was a viable candidate last year, what's changed other than they went 9-8 and he didn't have Joe Burrow for a chunk of the season? I mean, really, what changed? If you thought he was a candidate last year, he's a candidate now. And I'm happy for him. I know some people can look and they'll say, oh, it's his last name. And that last name's gotten him in the door in coaching, but he's paid his dues and he's done some good things, certainly with some good quarterbacks. It doesn't hurt to have Peyton Manning to work with. It doesn't hurt to have Matthew Stafford to work with. It doesn't hurt to have Joe Burrow to work with, but all of those guys speak very highly of Brian.
Skinny, is it possible that Joe Burrow going down and seeing the way the Bengals offense actually regrouped and played pretty well with Jake Browning back there maybe made him even more appealing this year than he was last year? Because, hey, this guy can clearly coach. It's not just playing with a great quarterback in Joe Burrow.
Yeah, maybe. That's a good point, Rick. Maybe.
On one hand, I think of it that way. On the other hand, I also hear like some of the local media types in Cincinnati who are like, well, if you're worried about him not calling plays, you don't get it. And it's like, well, hold on now. I mean, that kind of is a huge talking point for offensive coordinators is whether you call the plays or not. We bring it up seemingly every week after Bengals losses in this area. So it was a big talking point. And if I'm a fan of another team who's about to hire a coach, I would be questioning like, hey, this guy was an offensive coordinator, but he didn't actually even call the plays. Is he really ready? Like, I guess if I'm a Titans fan, I'm not getting a lot of excitement out of going from Mike Vrabel, who I see as a pretty good coach and a respected guy, to a no-namer who didn't really even call the plays in Brian Callahan.
Yeah, don't forget, Zach Taylor didn't call the plays in L.A. either, and wasn't even the offensive coordinator, and took the step from where he was to becoming Bengals head coach. And so, it obviously started very slowly for Zach. The one thing I would say is the interesting part, and I don't want to turn this into a Tennessee Titans podcast, is do they let him start with his own quarterback with that 7th pick, or do they say, no, we believe in Will Levis. We need you to believe in Will Levis. We need you to develop Will Levis. That'll be the interesting one for me going forward to see how quickly they allow him to do that, or they say no. And maybe that was part of it. Maybe that's part of the interview process of we believe in this kid. We need you to get on board with it. Or they say, no, he's our bridge guy. We're going to let you take your guy with pick 7. Maybe you don't have to play him right away, but you can start with your own.
You're a Kentucky football guy. Would you be confident in Will Levis, or would you feel like he should move on?
I said I thought he was one of the best quarterbacks in the draft. I really believe that because of the things he did under duress. And in the NFL, you don't get a chance to sit there and go through 6 progressions like you do at Ohio State or Alabama or those places. That's why, no offense, I've never believed in Ohio State quarterbacks. And C.J. Stroud has kind of broken that mold, and good for him. And maybe he's an outlier for all I know. But Bryce Young, it hasn't worked. And again, it's just rookie year, so I'm not going to fold the tent on him, but he really, really struggled. And I think a lot of that is these guys who come from elite programs, sometimes I got 10 seconds to throw back here. All right, what am I going to do? And you could say that maybe about Joe Burrow at LSU and all those things. Joe Burrow is such a fast processor of stuff. It's going to work for him. But to Will Levis, I've always believed he's got the arm talent. He's got the toughness. He's got leadership. He's obviously very quirky. I think the kid can play.
So the Bengals need a new offensive coordinator now. Dan Pitcher seemed like the natural succession plan they've been counting on, but he was also interviewing with the Raiders and Saints this week for potential offensive coordinator jobs and
interview with the Patriots as well.
And the Patriots. Another name that's been brought up by a lot of the fans is Joe Brady, the interim Bills offensive coordinator. He was the passing game coordinator for LSU back in 2019 when Burrow and Chase were on that team. Burrow, a senior, Chase, a sophomore at that time. He's probably looking for a head coach job, I would assume.
Well, The thing for him is, I read a story this morning where it says Bills will consider Brady for full-time OC. And I thought, well, that seems like a no-brainer to you guys. I mean, that firing of Ken Dorsey and the insertion of him, maybe it was just coincidence, but their offense took off when he became offensive coordinator. Again, maybe that wasn't all him. I think these cases are interesting. Obviously, the Joe Brady to Joe Burrow connection is one that everybody's talked about, and I fully understand that. But if Joe Brady is an OC who wants to call plays, you're not going to have that opportunity here. And that's to the Dan Pitcher part. If Dan wants to call plays, maybe that's where he takes a job elsewhere. If not, the succession, the reason they fought hard to keep him in this organization last year when he flirted with the Tampa Bay offensive coordinator job. They gave him a lot more money. I think they blocked him from actually talking to Tampa Bay, but they wanted him around for the potential succession plan of him stepping in as OC. Maybe he's got it of an inkling of I want to go call my own plays, and if the Raiders give me that opportunity, I want it. I can't imagine you want to go call plays for Mac Jones or whatever, Bailey Zappi, or whoever they have at quarterback in New England. I still think he is the OC here. I believe that because I think you can look and go, well, my head coach got a head coaching job without calling plays before he came here. He did it at UC, but not in the NFL. The guy I'm replacing didn't call plays here and just got a head coaching position. So there is a path for me to do that. So I think that's where he has to go. I've also had people ask me, well, why is he interviewing? Why are the Bengals? Well, listen, I'm going to go listen to people. And again, like I said, if I have it in my heart of hearts that I want to call plays and I'm getting the opportunity elsewhere, and it's a good opportunity, I think I'm going to take it. I don't think the opportunity in New England's good. The opportunity in Vegas is probably going to be pretty good. So I think that's where he has to weigh that decision. But to me, it would be, do I want to go call plays for a crippled Jimmy Garoppolo, Aiden O'Connell, and those guys? Or do I want to hitch my star again to Joe Burrow in a potential run to a Super Bowl and, again, be a hot coach on a hot staff?
Yeah, one thing to keep in mind here, too, about the Raiders is it was reported that Marvin Lewis is going to be on that staff formally with.
And
Anthony
he hired
here.
Dan Pitcher.
Yeah, so he's the guy who brought Pitcher to Cincinnati. Potentially, Pitcher could have that loyalty and want to work with Marvin again and go out to Vegas. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. It seems like Dan Pitcher is the most probable answer for the Bengals' next offensive coordinator. Do you feel like that's mostly a done deal, or do you feel like that's still a lot to play out there?
I think it's more his decision to make than it is I think the Bengals would love that. Like I said, I think this was the plan all along. The reason they fought to keep him as quarterbacks coach, because he is a really good quarterbacks coach. I mean, Zach Taylor made a point of, he's really the one responsible for developing Jake Browning because, when Jake was on the practice squad, Dan was the guy that would spend time after regular practice working with him because he doesn't get a lot of reps in practices as a practice squad quarterback. You're running some scout team stuff and you're really not developing. You're forced to make throws that you probably wouldn't make in a game. You're being asked to do things that don't come natural to you and you don't want to do. And so after practice, he spent time with Jake Browning. And so, again, he's a great quarterbacks coach, but this has been, in my opinion, the succession plan all along. It's why they fought to keep him on staff of, we love you as quarterbacks coach. We're going to pay you more than most quarterbacks coaches because if Brian gets a head coaching job, we want you to be the offensive coordinator. We
mentioned Joe Brady. He's been a guy that's bounced around a lot over the last few years since his time at LSU. He's been a climber for sure. He also just interviewed for that Falcons head coaching job. And again, I think that's where his sights are set on, is becoming a head coach sooner than later. Do you think that's a realistic name that should we talk about at all? Or do you think that's just a fan thing totally?
No, I think it's realistic. I just think, he's in a good situation in Buffalo. If they're going to make him the full-time OC and he can call plays, I think that's a no-brainer for him. And to your point, if somehow he lands a head coaching job off of this, well, obviously that takes you out of the mix for it. So I don't think it's a fan. I think it's easy for everybody to make that connection. But to me, I think it's still Dan Pitcher's job unless Dan Pitcher chooses to go elsewhere.
They also interviewed Seahawks offensive line coach Andy Dickerson for the offensive coordinator job. Do you have any insight on him? Is that a name?
I know they did, but I know nothing about him other than what his background is as the O-line coach in Seattle.
I know this is unfair because guys bounce around to different coaching jobs all the time. You could be a running backs coach in one place and then be some type of defensive coach in another place or whatever. So it's not really that you're tied to that and that's your only knowledge, but it does seem a little like weird or make me a little apprehensive when you start talking about an offensive line coach being your offensive coordinator. That's probably not fair, but it's just how I feel.
Well, especially when your offensive line coach that's already on staff, and it's clear that Frank Pollock's coming back, whether fans want him back or not, is also your run game coordinator. So if you bring this guy, do you take that title away from him? Because, most offensive line coaches are tied to the run game.
Yeah. Feels like there might be some clashing there, which, whatever. Not sure exactly how I feel about that either way. I don't love Frank Pollock at the moment, or his run game coordinating that he's been doing. So not sure if that's a big hit, but it is something that would have to be sorted out. Skinny, my feeling is that I've always felt that Joe Burrow should essentially be the Bengals GM in these situations, and he should get to handpick whoever he wants. After the way this year went, with we kind of see him go down. The Bengals do change up the offense a little bit. They start going under center more. They start using more play action. All the things that we had kind of been talking about. Well, they're not going to do that because Joe Burrow doesn't want to do that. They do those things. They find some success, maybe even more consistent success than they actually found while Joe Burrow was running the team earlier in the season, despite taking a major step back in talent at the quarterback position. Should I be rethinking that of letting Joe Burrow make his own decisions and be the GM here? Or should we really be like the adults in the room and say, no, Joe, actually, it's best if we do it this way and you'll be better this way?
I will say in Joe's post-season press conference with us the day after the season, which I give him a lot of credit for, he didn't have to do it. We asked, and we kind of asked thinking he's going to say no, and he said, yeah, I'll do it. He said, I paid attention to that. I noticed what some of the things that worked. And he did say, listen, we were going to incorporate those if my calf was better. And I think they were. I mean, that had been talked about as they were going. In fact, they did do it in San Francisco. They incorporated some of that stuff, and they had arguably their most efficient offensive game of the season in San Francisco. So, yeah, I think he's also smart enough to see some of those things too. And he is smart enough because he made a point of it with us that he saw it.
Well, it's not so much that he's not smart enough to see it, but I guess my original stance on this would have been like, whatever Joe Burrow says, it goes. Like, just let him do whatever he wants to do because he's smarter than all of you guys. Now I'm wondering if, okay, he's really talented. He's really great at processing these things, but it might be good to have a different set of eyes telling him, okay, here's what we should be running, and here's actually what will be most efficient for us, and we just need you to execute that better.
Yeah, that sounds great in theory.
Well, which side do you come out at? Should Joe Burrow have free reign and be able to call all the shots, basically?
No, not free reign.
That's how I've always felt, is like, just turn it over to Joe and let him decide whatever he wants in terms of personnel.
But I also think that they realize that he's capable of doing what you're saying of making things work that he likes. The whole thing of they don't use a ton of motion because he wants to see the defense as it is primarily. They use some, obviously. They may even incorporate a little bit more next year. But he likes to see a defense set to get a good pre-snap read, and that's one of the things he's so good at. And that's fine. If that makes him more comfortable, I'm fine with it because he does execute on top of everything else at an elite level.
Sure. All right. A couple other things to get here to a little bit more minor. Tyler Boyd was at a Pittsburgh High School Hall of Fame event, and he was asked, of course, about free agency, Bengals, and other things. So about the Bengals, he said, quote, "I definitely feel like they will try to keep me, and depending on the value and money, it's a business, but I would love to come back," which nothing surprising there. But then he was asked about potentially playing in Pittsburgh for the Steelers. And he said, "You never know. I love Coach Tomlin. He's probably one of the realest dudes in the sports business. Obviously, I played at Pitt and I had a lot of run-ins with him and talked to him just about football. His personality is more like a father figure. It's a great connection, but who knows? Even if I don't go after this year, I could do a one-year deal at the end of my career and maybe finish up there, but who knows?" Skinny, first of all, this feels very much like Tyler Boyd wants to play in Pittsburgh,
Absolutely.
which is a surprise. How big of an issue is this going to be for Bengals fans if Tyler Boyd ends up in Pittsburgh?
Not going to like it, but it feels like a natural fit. Most people know his background. He grew up in a suburb of Pittsburgh, Clarion, Pennsylvania, where he was a star, played his college football at Pitt. That's where he's had conversations with Mike Tomlin. Don't think that Mike Tomlin is doing anything illegal.
Tampering, Skinny, tampering.
Yeah, exactly. So those conversations were from back then. He's got family still there, so it seems like a natural fit. I mean, it's always felt like that. I know that's a fear of Bengals fans, that Tyler Boyd would come back and get you, but that's kind of the nature of the business.
But, I mean, in terms of most hated Steelers wide receiver, like Hines Ward and Juju Smith-Schuster or somewhere, like Tyler Boyd goes pretty high on that list, right?
Antonio Brown's pretty high up there, too.
Antonio Brown's high, yeah.
Yeah.
I forget that he's even really a Steelers guy now because he had so many lives since then.
It shows you the fickleness of fans, right?
It does, but this one will be tough to get over, and I understand why, I think.
And I'll be honest, I've said it before, and when we talked to Tyler after that last game, he did talk about wanting to come back, but I think he also understands he's probably not. I mean, unless he comes up with some silly team-friendly deal, and I don't know, if that would take place. I'll be honest with you. I think just from a production standpoint, it is time to move on. I mean, he was okay this year, but he wasn't. Listen, he isn't turning the clock back, in my opinion. It's just going to go get a step worse each and every year to me.
Yeah, he's now a 30-year-old guy who was never elite to begin with. So
that's correct. He was a nice slot receiver.
Yeah, a little grit ball who played hard and
Yes.
probably past his time. But if he goes to Pittsburgh, you just know that he's going to have a big catch in an AFC North game against the Bengals, and fans are going to lose their minds about it, and understandably so. It is going to be hard to, I just blame this all on Jeremy Rao. Jeremy Rao ran him out of town, and it's all on him. All right. The website, sportsbetting.ag, has given the Bengals odds of 12-1 to win the Super Bowl next season, which is tied for the 5th lowest odds, Skinny. The teams with the 3 lowest odds are still alive in this year's postseason are San Francisco at 5-1, Baltimore and Kansas City at 8-1, and the Buffalo Bills are the 4th choice at 10-1. Detroit Lions are tied with the Bengals at 12-1, tied for those 5th best odds. What are your thoughts there? Too high for the Bengals? Too low? Is that what you expected?
I would say too low, because you asked me a couple weeks ago if I would bet on them making the playoffs, and I said I don't know if I would bet on them making the playoffs because of the holes on defense. You can also look at the flip side of it again. Does Joe Burrow being healthy win one of those 2 Pittsburgh games? It probably wins the first one, right? And the loss to Houston wasn't because of, Tyler Boyd dropped a touchdown pass in that game that could have been the deciding factor too, and that's 11-6, and that does have them in the playoffs. And so if you think they're getting back to the playoffs, which I think is fair for most people to think, again, you asked me if I'd bet on it. I wouldn't bet on it, but again, I think they do make the playoffs. If you think that's the case, then they're obviously with what they've done in the past have more than a puncher's chance to get to the Super Bowl. If they get to the Super Bowl, you're 50-50 to win it. So I get where those odds are coming from.
Yeah, it's hard with this Bengals team because we're close to it. And so, from a fan's perspective, I look at it and say, oh, look at the glaring holes. The defense was so bad this year. They got to improve so many things. But then I also start looking at other teams' roster situations going into this offseason, even some of the ones that are, in theory, better than the Bengals or were this year. And I'm like, Bengals have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and probably T. Higgins coming back next year. It's a pretty damn good place to start at. And then there are some other pieces that are already sealed up too, or locked up going forward too. So it's in a lot of ways, the Bengals roster is in a better spot than most teams going into next year. And they have Joe Burrow. So 12-1, 5th lowest odds feels about right. I don't think I would have the Bengals any lower than 7th or 8th.
Right. No, correct.
And so they're tied for 5th. It basically puts you in the top 6. That feels about right to me.
Let's not forget, this is a Bengals team that, when it was healthy, beat the 49ers. Granted, the 49ers did not have Trent Williams that day, did not have Deebo Samuel that day, but they also beat them handily on the road. Beat the Buffalo Bills. We're toe-to-toe with the Chiefs on the road in that next-to-last game of the season. We're toe-to-toe with the Ravens. Hell, might have beat the Ravens in Baltimore on that Thursday night if Burrow doesn't hurt his wrist. So how far away are they really, I guess?
Yeah. It's funny because you can go either side of this when you talk about the Bengals heading the offseason, but the farther we get away from the season and the more I settle down, I feel like I'm more on that latter side of things of what, actually they're in a pretty good spot going into next year.
And let's not forget, for some of those slotted games, because as most people know, the schedules are set well in advance, years in advance, but there's always a couple of 3 open spots where you play a like finisher from a division. Don't forget, they get a last place schedule. They get last place finishers in those slots, which
is going to be nice because they haven't had that for a few years
right
now. All right, Skinny, real quick before we get to Ask Skinny anything, let's go ahead and pick these NFL playoff games. We've got 2 games this weekend for the conference championships. 3 p.m. on Sunday, we've got Chiefs at the Ravens. The Ravens are a 3.5-point favorite. The total is 44.5.
Baltimore's just annihilated people at home all year. I was on my normal hit on WLW on Friday and was asked to kind of pick things all the way out. And I said, the way Buffalo was playing, I picked them to win the Super Bowl. I just thought that they were going to win that Chiefs game, and they were going to go steal that game at Baltimore and look up, and a hot Bills team's in the Super Bowl and they're going to win it. That obviously didn't take place. But I also said in regards to them playing Kansas City, and I did this with Georgia during the college season, until you kill the king off, the king is still the king, man. And the king knows it's the king, and the king knows how to find ways to win games. I'm still picking Baltimore by a touchdown plus. Like I said, they've been the most impressive team probably from start to finish all season long on both sides of the football. And you combine that in one team, it's a hell of a mix. That said, if I'm a Ravens fan, Patrick Mahomes on the other side still would scare the daylight bejesus out of me because of the success he's had in the playoffs. But I'm going to go Baltimore by a touchdown.
Well, it feels like Vegas agrees with you because that 3.5 number is begging everyone to take the Chiefs.
Yep.
I mean, that hook added onto the 3. And honestly, I think they're going to get me here. I agree with you about the Ravens. They've been awesome, but I think I'm probably going to put my money on the Chiefs side of things and hope this comes down to a field goal game. My actual prediction, I'll go Ravens 27, Chiefs 24.
I'll go 27-20, so I'm kind of in the vein.
Yeah, but so I'll have the Chiefs covering, the Ravens winning, but I wouldn't be entirely surprised if the Chiefs win. Don't forget, Skinny, Taylor Swift is on their side.
No question. And a naked Jason Kelce.
Yes. So those are two forces that I don't know if we're ready, if the NFL scriptwriters are ready to have that part of the story come to an end just yet. So
exactly. Yeah, no. Well, as you know, a Canadian TV station had the halftime entertainment for I think it was the Baltimore Ravens San Francisco 49ers Super Bowl. So the script does say Baltimore wins, but it doesn't say if it covers or not in this game.
I love how people are thinking that news producers for TV stations are the ones in charge and would have access to the script. When I tell you that I've worked in that room, I've been a part of that whole operation. There's no one more prone to stupid F-ups than people in that room. No so question. When I tell you that is like undoubtedly just some dude who's been worked silly over the past however many years and
just
is delirious and sleepy. He doesn't even know who's still alive in the NFL playoffs. He's just a script writer, saw 2 names, wrote them in there because he saw that they had won. He had no idea that we weren't even at the Super Bowl yet. Probably I guarantee it.
That's probably right.
Yeah. The other thing, real quick, we have avoided this at all costs all season long. I haven't brought it up one time. Can I just say, the men who are complaining about Taylor Swift during these games, you've got to get a grip on your life. I honestly, I watched the full games. I've watched all of them. They show her 3 or 4 times up on the screen for a half of a second, and they go away. The announcers aren't even talking about what is honestly bothering you so much. It impacted my viewing of the game. Zilch. There was zero impact, except it was kind of fun to see Jason Kelce up there drinking beer shirtless.
Wouldn't you like to see Mr. Bill Painted Face guy instead?
Right. Like that's that much better. I mean, like my wife wanted to see Taylor on the TV when they scored. She missed it because it was so quick. She didn't even see her on the TV. Like it's not really interrupting anything. And yet every week I'm just bombarded by tweets and guys on Sports Talk Radio talking about it endlessly. Like it is such a big deal. I'm like, would you shut up and focus on the game? Because you're way bigger distraction than she is.
Yeah, it doesn't affect me one iota.
I can't understand the fascination with this. Like it is so bizarre that people are getting that worked up over it when they really have done a great job of not paying much attention to it at all during these broadcasts. All right, 6:30, we've got Lions at 49ers. 49ers are a 7-point favorite. The total is 51.
Yeah, it's interesting. The impact that Deebo Samuel has on that offense is humongous. That being said, I just don't trust Detroit's defense, especially on the road. Jared Goff outdoors. Listen, it's been a fun run for Detroit. It would be so cool. It feels very parallel to the Bengals, like if they make the run all the way to the Super Bowl. But I think the dream dies here. The 2 most complete teams in the NFL, really from start to finish, have been Baltimore and San Francisco. And I think the 49ers finished the NFC off in style with I'll go 31-19 victory.
If I was going to say 31-21, I'm in the exact same boat. I'd love to see the Lions do it. I'm be rooting for them. I just don't see it happening, though. I think the 49ers roll in this one. So there you go. Those are our picks for the conference championship games. And Skinny, it is time for a little Ask Skinny Anything segment. This will be a quick one.
All righty.
What is Skinny's coaching value statement? My guess is take the charge, W's will follow.
It is. I had a former athletic director where I did coach who texted me on Sunday and says, "You'll be proud to know my 2nd grade son took 2 charges today." And I texted him back and I said, "Hey, start him young, man. The younger, the better." Yeah, I am Mr. Take a Charge guy. I believe in it because I believe it does show toughness. It is a way to keep people from straight line driving on you when you don't have elite shot blockers at a high school level. So yeah, that would be clearly my mission statement.
Okay, so we haven't talked about this either all season, and I've just been loving it so much, but I haven't brought it up because I didn't want us to be a one-trick pony here on this podcast. The college game has finally basically eliminated charges on the block charge situation where you're going to the basket. They changed where the gather point starts and how they're deciding that. So it's almost impossible to slide in when a guy's going up for a shot and take a charge now. And magically, since they stopped calling it and rewarding guys being parking cones and falling down, there are all of a sudden hardly any collisions underneath the basket in college games. The pace of the game, everything has been way better this year, in my opinion.
Yeah,
have you been bothered by the lack of charges?
I haven't been bothered by it because I will say, I mean, at that level, the game is played far more above the rim, where you can challenge shots and block shots and affect the game with that. You don't have those guys at the high school level to do that. Most of the game is played below the rim, and that's where there is a premium on blocking out. There is a premium on taking a charge. There is a premium on keeping people in front of you because you just don't have that kind of talent at the rim to affect shots.
I'm telling you, somehow in college they've figured out a way to make it work without it. I promise you it'll work in high school too.
I don't know, man. I'm telling you,
on the ball instead of being parking cones. Actually teach them to be defenders.
The straight line drive anymore is really, especially with all this 5-out stuff, it's hard to guard that straight line drive anymore. It really is.
I don't.
I worry more about that going into games than I do anything else.
But as we've talked about, sometimes you're just not meant to guard the other guy. If you can't keep him in front, he gets to score. That's how the game works. What is each of your favorite TV shows that you have binge watched?
I'm not a big binge watch guy. I mean, we binge watched kind of to a degree Ted Lasso, although we really didn't binge watch it. We kind of made that kind of a weekly thing to catch back up. Brockmire, when it was a thing, we binge watched that after sitting it aside. I tried to watch Schitt's Creek and binge watch some of that, and it just was so cringy that I it's funny in parts, but it was so cringy in parts that I just kind of tuned out of it. So yeah, I mean, especially for me, from about July until about the end of March, early April, I got Bengals every day into coaching basketball into March Madness. There isn't much time to binge watch many TV shows in there.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat in terms of recently I haven't watched anything good. It's been a few years, but Skinny, I want to ask you this first. How often do I talk about politics?
Next to none, to my knowledge.
Never. I don't think about them ever. I don't know what's going on. I know nothing about politics. I just want to get that out of the way before I tell you about my favorite shows, because my favorite show ever is probably West Wing.
Okay, yeah.
Another show that was really not very good, but I loved watching it while it was being released on Netflix was House of Cards. I thought that first season of House of Cards may be my favorite season of TV ever. After that, it just went off the rails, but I continued to watch and I enjoyed it, even though it sucked. I mean, Breaking Bad's definitely in the conversation.
I never watched it.
You should.
I know of it. Yeah. I will say, if I am at home, it's usually Saturday morning, Sunday morning-ish before you get into sports things in the afternoon. Old reruns of 2.5 Men, and I can watch, and I hunt around for any of the Law and Order series. I love all the Law and Orders.
Law and Order's still going. I mean, they're just printing money with that thing still. It's unbelievable. Yep. Dun dun. All right.
Their stories.
What's Skinny's best, most memorable Valentine's Day date? I'm guessing he's not a big V-Day guy, so if he doesn't have a good one, what's his overall thoughts on Valentine's Day?
So my buddy Tom Gamble and I once decided, we were on the west side of Cincinnati and we were passing a flower store, and we both decided it'd be nice to get some flowers for our wives for Valentine's Day. And because we really weren't those kind of guys, it raised red flags for both. It was like, we tried it. I'm just not that guy.
Your wives thought you were cheating or something because you came in with flowers.
We just did it on a whim. It's like, let's stop in the floors. Let's do this.
We're going to be good guys. We're going to be good husbands today.
Yep.
Then you got chewed out when you got home because you were up to no good. That's beautiful. I've got a great wife in that regard. We don't do many gifts and things like that. We go out for a great dinner on Valentine's Day, but we don't really worry about the silliness of it. So that's nice. If you were to write a wildly exaggerated autobiography, what would be the title and the most absurd chapter name? That's a tough one to answer on the spot.
Wow. I'd have to think about that. The wildest chapter would have to probably be like first part of senior year of high school. It felt like there was a party every weekend and I was completely off the rails.
Was that the time your buddy wrapped his car around a pole after smoking dope in the parking lot?
Yes, and I wasn't with him that day, thank God.
Nice. So maybe something along those lines. We have to get a play on words there. The title of the book would be like "Not Actually That Angry" or something.
Yeah, maybe something like that. No, I'll tell you what it would be called. And I used to do this because everybody always thinks I'm negative in my sports takes. And that's fine. The title of the book would be called "The Realist." I feel like I'm a realist.
Actually, that seems pretty you. Yeah.
Like you asked me about UC basketball, and I give you, I think, an honest take, and UC fans get pissed, and that's fine. If you're a fan, I get it. But I've also said good things about them, and nobody rooted harder for them to get to the college football championship game than I did, I think, because I thought they deserved it. So
right.
I'm trying to be real.
And that is just not a thing that's taken well in this day and age.
It's not.
Like
It's
only
not.
Positivity, only sunshine and rainbows at all times.
Homerism.
Yep.
I like it. It gave me the realist. I like it.
I like that. All right. Well, we'll work on that autobiography here in the next few years. Well, I'm sure that'll come out in late 2028.
And I'll call it the wildest chapter would be called the McDonald's years.
The McDonald's years, the Latonia McDonald's parking lot, baby.
Yes, correct.
Who are the biggest divas in local newscasts? Anchors, weather people, sportscasters, investigative reporters, etc.
Yes.
So does this person want a specific name, or do they want just like which type of people?
You're around them closer than I am.
It's anchors without question.
Yeah, but I've worked. I mean, we've also worked with some that are down to earth, really cool people. I mean, there are no better people than the morning people on Local 12 to me. They're all
100%. I was just going to say that.
Jen Dalton, Aaliyah, John Lomax back in the day, Tara Blake, all those people in the morning on the morning show, I think come off as very real. I think that's why they're so likable. And honestly, they're good people.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I wouldn't know anything about working with diva anchors because I truly worked with maybe the most impressive people I've ever been around in my entire life on the morning show with anchors. I mean, like Sheila Gray is no joke, the most talented person I've ever seen in media. She's really that good.
Bob's damn close.
Yeah, and Bob's way up there too. They do it totally different styles, but they are both insanely talented and great people. Really, really kind to me. So to be clear, that's not who I'm talking about, but I would say anchors, you probably have your more divas in there than anything. Weather people are all big nerds from what I've gathered. Like they all really like to nerd out about.
But I listen, if I had to do my career, I've told you, if I had to do my career over again, I think I'd go for a degree in meteorology and be a meteorologist on TV. I'm a weather geek.
It would be perfect for you too, because you're misunderstood with your takes in sports, and that's all meteorology is. It's just being misunderstood the whole time. No one even understands what you're trying to predict, and they just get mad at you because you're wrong all the time.
That's correct.
Opinion. That's a great
job. You predicted 3 inches of snow. We got 4.2.
Yeah.
It snowed a little more.
Thanks, Chief. Yeah. So if you want actual names, that's going to be kind of hard to do here. I think.
From where we work, I honestly, I like them all.
Yeah, we don't have any real big divas at Channel 12. I don't feel definitely none that are there now currently.
Yeah, I go back to the long time that Rob Braun and Cammie Durkin did it when I was anchoring some sports. They couldn't have been better to me.
Yeah. Even around the city, I would say the people that end up being the biggest divas are usually the people that are here and gone quickly. Like you don't see them last in Cincinnati at all because no one gets along with them. They don't talk to anyone. They don't you can tell. You see the tweets and the camaraderie and the groups, the cliques hanging out at games and stuff. Like if they're not part of that group, chances are they won't be here long and they're probably a little bit of a diva.
Yeah, and that's one of the things about this marketplace. We like our own. They don't have to be local people per se, but we like our own who have been here for years and get used to them.
Yeah. Sorry, it's not. I mean, when you give us who do you want to punch in the face the most from local media, we can give you a funny answer.
Jeremy Rout knows it's him. He knows it's him. I mean, he knows
exactly. It's JR. But
it.
if you actually we got to call people divas, I don't know. That's gonna be tough. That's kind of like a weird insult to put on people. So sorry if that wasn't a great answer. That's all I got.
That's all I got. Appreciate it very much. Thanks for being with us. We'll be back next week as we get set for the Super Bowl. Much more college basketball as conference actions heating up and more. Join us next week on the Skinny Podcast. For Rick Broering, I'm Richard Skinner. Thanks for being with us. It's been sponsored by Blake, the Attorney Maislin.
You can always find our stories here on YouTube, but go ahead and tap subscribe. That way you're always in the know.